Okay, let's get started. I see that you're still really loving your back row seats.
It's nice back there, isn't it?
I'm very, very happy to have David Cross here, who's going to go and sit with you guys at the back by the looks of things.
You can take over, Jonathan.
Okay.
He knows what I'm going to say anyway.
No. But David Cross is a reader in art and design. Well, he'll introduce himself, but let me say something about David first.
Don't say anything. It's not.
And it has been recorded, but it won't go public. It's only for you. David's actually one of my heroes because he constantly challenges and questions everything and anything from any direction, but always with a kind of positive mindset rather than destructive mindset. And I think there's a difference between that. So the idea of subversion, of subverting things, can be very negative, but then the idea of subverting things for positive purposes, to try and rebuild, to rethink, to reshape, is a really, really fantastic thing to do. And that's what I've seen in David in his work, in his art and design work, in his teaching work, and as a colleague for a number of years. So I'm really happy that you're here anyway.
It's mutual, actually. I mean, one of the great things about working at UAL is a double monster, in a way. You've got the individual art colleges, and then you've got the university. And the art school and the university are not the same thing. I used to be based at Camberwell, and I got moved away from Camberwell up to Chelsea to be part of the graduate school, but also kind of promoted, really, to be a reader, which is a very vague title. I guess it means you have to read things, but there's also a wider remit there. But I began to discover that the university that we're in is fractured in some ways. It's got fault lines that run through it. It's got differences. It's got variety and contrast, but it also has tension and conflict at certain points. And what I'm interested in at the moment is how pressure from the outside world, the financial system of the world, is bearing down on the educational system in Britain and what that's doing to our universities. And it's putting under pressure. If you put a rock under pressure, it'll crack. But at certain points, you can say just before it cracks, you can identify a fault line. And so one of the things I do is look for fault lines in situations, anticipating that the future is going to bring more stress, more difficulty, more challenges, more even than we've got now. So planning ahead and worrying where there might be a future problem, for most people they're like, oh, it's so negative, we've got enough to be dealing with here. But I find it exciting. If you look ahead into the future and you search out information, not necessarily that fits your point of view, but it is on a subject you're interested in, you can start to probe further than just the ordinary news media, and you can start to take a position on things that interest you. So what I want to do today is two things, and they're connected. One of them is to talk a bit about what research in art and design is, not research generally, but specifically in art and design. How is research on art and design special and particular? And then the second thing is, having shown you what I think makes art and design research special, is to give you one example of a project which comes out of my own art practice and has then fed back into my relationship with the university. So it's a way of showing that research isn't something that just stays in a book that you submit as part of a project for assessment. It's something, if you really like what you're doing, and why would you do art and design if you didn't really like it? I can't think of any reason. You do it because you love it, hopefully. You become interested and absorbed and fascinated by the things that you study, to the point where you develop more knowledge about it and more robust opinions about it than most people who perhaps don't give it that level of attention. So in a way, you become a kind of expert in your specialist area. Sometimes it applies directly in the work you're doing, and other times it's more like just to the side. But the ideal is that it helps you make decisions about the kind of work you want to take on, the kind of organisations you want to work for, the kind of commissions or projects, the kind of books that you'd want your work to go in. Whatever it might be, it helps you make decisions about how to put your career forward into the world, how to get your creativity connected to the world of ideas and actions around you. I have a terrible tendency to say too much. I'll try and keep it short, and I'm going to do that. I come back to the notes I've made. I supervise PhDs across the university, and they're always a struggle, but they're always fascinating. One of the main things that they share in common is this fault line or split between creative practice and intellectual theory, cognitive work that argues why you do something and articulates exactly what it is you're doing. For me, I find it very helpful to go back to these 4 points here: the question, the context, the methodology, and the outcomes. So that when I begin a new project and I don't know what I'm doing, I go to the library, I read, I talk to friends, I waste time. I make notes and they're not that good. I do sketches and doodles of things I've done before, and I immerse myself in it. And then gradually I start going, I think I know what I'm doing. Retrospectively then, it can be very helpful to apply these questions. You don't have to start with them. If you start with them, it can be like handcuffs and you can't progress. Your freedom's limited. You think, I've got to answer the question set. No, your job is to frame what you do as a creative practitioner in terms of these structures of thinking. So the research question is, what is the issue? Because if there isn't an issue, then maybe there isn't a question. You might just be looking at Victorian buildings, or just looking at fashion in a certain period of time, or you just like black and white films. Whatever it is, that's not a question, that's an area of interest. If you can come up with a question like, why is it that this kind of cultural product produces this kind of response? Or is there anything that we can do in photography to address the issue of gender? Or whatever it might be, you make a question up and keep testing it. Is it a good question? You can change it later, but it's good if you've got a good question in your mind, that'll really help your research. The context sounds very abstract, but if you just ask yourself, what am I inspired by? And you might think, well, I really like the first Blade Runner film, but I can't stand the second one because of the way it represents women. And you might say, well, okay, that puts me in the field of gender studies, or it puts me in the field of visual culture and identity politics, or maybe I'll look at futures or whatever. But you find a discourse which is a room full of people having a discussion. They have talks and lectures, they publish papers, they have conferences, they might get together and make an edited book, and you want to be in with a particular group of people. This general idea of a career consists of specific things like a commission to go in a building, or a prize for doing a certain thing, or a chapter in a book. Those are second one along outcomes. The one I struggle with most is methodology. Like, how are you going to do something? And I've said here, the question that I ask myself is, how will I combine creative thinking, where you take a risk and just do something new that hasn't been done before? Really can make you nervous, because you think, maybe it isn't original, maybe it's a bit stupid, maybe people will laugh at me, it might not get recognised. To do something creative is to do something new, and that means you're taking a risk. So how do you combine that risk-taking creativity with critical thinking? So critical thinking is so important. There's many different types of thinking, but my favourite one is critical, and I've gone back to this book. I can't pronounce his name properly, but I think it's Gers, Raymond Gers, The Idea of a Critical Theory. And it's one of those lovely thin books that isn't going to weigh your life down forever. Hopefully they've got it in the library. But he spells out the work done by the Frankfurt School in Germany, where the concept of critical theory was developed. And what's so special about critical theory is that it helps people think about what they should do. It's not just an idea for a game, it's not just a piano practice to get skilled at being intelligent. It's about helping shape the conditions within which action takes place. So, to help shape action, it has to have 2 characteristics. One of those is that it is reflexive. So you don't just look at something out in the world and study it like a scientist might study something in a microscope. You think about your position in relationship to the thing that you're studying. So look, where do I stand in relation to this? So it's reflexive. And am I using the right methods? So these questions about methodology come back in, that I could do it like this, or I could do it like that. I'm going to choose a mixture of both because I like this aspect and that aspect. And you start making conscious choices. So if someone says, oh, that's interesting, why are you doing photography of microscopic plants in the forest? Or like, oh, why are you using YouTube videos to study race riots in America? And you can say, well, I've chosen this method because it's going to take me further forward. It's got specific characteristics, like a tool in a toolbox. You use a screwdriver for one kind of thing, you might use a saw for another. And so depending on whether you want to join 2 ideas together or split them apart, you use a connecting kind of tool or a dividing kind of tool. And your methodology is far more complex than that, but broadly it's like choosing a way of doing something because it matches what you want to achieve. Do you want to split an idea into its components, or do you want to join two things together? Is one way of thinking about that. So critical theory is reflexive. It's saying why you're doing something in a certain way. But much more than reflexive. The real goal for me is that it is emancipatory. It brings about a condition of liberation or freedom where you are more aware of what you really want to do in life rather than what your parents told you, what the Vice-Chancellor of the university says is right for the creative industries, what your boss tells you to do, even more than maybe what the members of staff who run the university do. It might be you say, well, okay, I accept this part of it, but I'm going to do it for my own reasons, because I won't always be here. I'm going to move on. My life is going to take me many places, and I need to carry with me an understanding of why I act in order that I can choose the things which are, in what Marxists would call, my real interests. Because they say we're living in a dream, we're living in a world of illusions and problems where we can't get to the actual conditions we live in because we're dazzled by media images or tricked by the news reporting. So critical theory is reflexive, where you choose a way of going about things for a certain reason, and it's emancipatory. It frees you from illusions. It frees you from prejudice. It frees you from bias. It helps you situate your knowledge in a way so that you know why you think a certain thing. My subject's climate change, for example, and I talk to people sometimes and they say, oh yeah, but the scientists are really uncertain about climate change. I heard somewhere the other day that it's a balance between people who believe and people who don't believe. I used to say, no, you're actually wrong, the evidence shows this, and now I don't do that. I say, where did you get your information from? And they'll say, oh, I heard it on the BBC. And okay, the BBC will tell you that because of the way they structure arguments between opposing points of view. So critical theory doesn't necessarily lead you to a particular conclusion, but it puts you in a position where you understand why you think certain things. And you might say, well, I'm always going to trust Edward Snowden of WikiLeaks because he did the right thing and never got any money for it. He's kind of famous, but not like a celebrity. Whereas I wouldn't trust Rupert Murdoch of News International because he hides behind the scenes and he buys advertising companies and public relations. So I wouldn't trust them as a source of information. That's my position. So I say it. I don't trust Rupert Murdoch of News International. Wouldn't mean I always think they're lying, but I think there's an angle on it and there's usually a hidden agenda. So critical thinking is a way of making clear to the world why you think certain things. I'm going to speed through a little bit here. For me, the motive for research, like why would you do research, is a crucial thing. We've got why would you think a certain thing? It's like because you read The Sun. Your attitudes to women might be shaped by the media that you absorb on a daily basis. So if you read The Sun, you're going to have a certain type of attitude towards gender relations, and so on. If you read Marxist theory, you're going to have a different set of attitudes. But the motive is a different thing. Like, why would you do research? For me, it's because I think the world is in a terrible state. Everywhere I look, there's problems and there's potential solutions, but people can't quite see them. Perhaps they're lost or bored or frightened or anxious, or they haven't got the time, or perhaps they're set in their ways or whatever. But it seems to me that the world is in need of improvement. It could be much better, and that art and design could help it. So the motive to do something that's going to make a positive difference is a great source of weakness for me, because when you want something and you can't have it, it makes you yearn for it in a way. Whereas when you're satisfied, like just after a good meal, or when you're happy with your situation, your mind doesn't tend to range around anxiously asking questions. You're like, no, things are fine. So for me, I want something special. More and better and different in the world would be just fantastic. London's a great place of change. Not only do they change the buildings and the street layout sometimes, but the relationships in it change, and people come here to be transformed. I hope that transformation isn't just about getting skills so you can get a job, so you can pay off your debts, because that would be a bit like a closure of meaning, whereby the situation you're in becomes the reason you're doing something. And if you haven't chosen the key elements of that, you're being drifted along with the current, the great tide of history. So for me, the idea that art and design research can help put you in the driving seat or put you in the position where you want to be. You can choose your way forward in the world. You know where you stand and you can see where you want to go. It's really simple in a way, but very few people do it. If we think of a cultural knowledge as a kind of landscape or terrain, then research could be seen as a kind of journey. So there's a kind of map in a way, and then there's the journey across the map. And I think that how you approach that is a very important thing. For me, the idea that knowledge produces power is not so interesting. It does do that, but I think it's better if it produces a kind of anti-power, emancipation. The freedom is not when you have power over somebody else, it's when they don't have power over you. And so to just get power in return, you're just doing the same thing. So for me, freedom is when you kind of move away from power and you have this emancipatory impulse instead. And it can leave you feeling very small and very isolated sometimes. So that's me. As soon as I saw this image in one of the studios here after the degree show years ago, a student from Camberwell just chucked it away at the end. They weren't interested. And I was sweeping up and I came across it. It was a 35mm slide and looked at it and I couldn't see what it was. And then as I looked closer and closer, I saw this little character in the road and I thought, oh God, that's me. There am I, setting out on this big journey, not really knowing where I'm going, not quite sure what's going to happen, possibly not very well equipped, feeling a bit nervous, but willing to set out anyway. So it's not about being in total control, it's about taking a risk in a way and having that sense of adventure. I'm a great admirer of people who have a sense of adventure, not necessarily just recklessness, but a kind of sense of curiosity that drives them forward in the world. Herman Melville, who wrote the fantastic novel Moby Dick, actually spent time on a ship. Horrible, it's a whaling ship, but he got on board the whaling ship and travelled, I think, for 5 years. And what he learned on that journey, the experience that he got by throwing himself into that position, gave him this sort of knowledge, this deep knowledge in many different ways from his own experience, which gave him the confidence as well as the substance to write that fantastic novel. If you get a chance to read it, it's so well worth it. The language is quite dense and difficult, but it's this beautiful thing that sees through the illusions of the world and recognises that there's many different layers to existence, from the hard world of interaction between people to the dream state when your mind drifts away and you start seeing into the depths. So it's a wonderful piece of work. And I think it tells us a lot about the human condition, that we're not straightforwardly professionals, we're citizens as well. And we have a subconscious and an unconscious, we dream and we imagine, and we can be inspired by things, as well as we're able to think clearly and carefully and to take reasoned decisions. So we're not just rational beings, and for me that's a crucial thing to recognise that literature brings to my understanding of art. Research in art and design is more than just discovering or extracting information that's already out there. It's not mining. Sometimes you might go to the library and pull out something which is there already, it's been pre-produced, but other times it can be like an exchange. And here I've used this image of a camel train making a great journey from one place to another, carrying silk and maybe returning with spices. A circuit of exchange between places is a way of thinking about knowledge, which historically has been very true. The Silk Road, this enormous journey that's linked East Asia, China particularly, right the way through to Europe, has got a great historical depth to it, which I was never taught about. The maps I was given when I was learning history in school focused on Europe, like Europe was all you needed to know about. And that was a very narrow frame of reference. We did do a little bit more, but it always returned back to London, back to Britain, back to Europe. And for me, it took me years. Actually, it wasn't until I came to art school that I realised that the frame on the knowledge I'd been taught was just one frame and there could have been others. It was by meeting people with different backgrounds from different parts of the world that I really began to see that my knowledge was just a little tiny piece in this much bigger picture. Knowledge and power are closely connected, but even the strongest research is made into weak research if it's exempt from the kind of scrutiny and investigation that it imposes on its subject. So I've got this picture here of an investigator spying on somebody with suspicion in his mind. I'm imagining what he's thinking. Why is he filming them from a distance? Why out of a moving vehicle? Perhaps he hasn't got the courage to go up to them and say that he wants to take their picture. Perhaps he's not acting with their informed consent. perhaps is spying on them. He might be therefore not acting in a relationship of trust, but in one where he's exploiting them by taking their picture in a way which is unethical. Here at the university, if you want to take someone's picture, if you want to involve them in your research, you have to face them and say, this is what I'm doing, would you be interested in joining me? If you don't like it, you can back out, but I do need your signature so that I can see if anyone stops me and they say, have I got permission? I can go, well, I've got more than permission, I've got informed consent. So informed consent is about mutual respect between people, where you say, this is what I want to do. If you like it, join me. If you don't, it's a shame, but I'm not going to judge you for it. And I certainly won't be taking pictures of you from a moving vehicle. So the great benefit and strength is that artists and designers' methods are open to revision and to question. Other people can go, why did you do it like that? And you pretty much have to say, you can't just go, it's private or it's secret. That wouldn't get you any respect. So to get the respect that you want in the discourse that you're in, you have to be able to say, well, here's what I've done. I know it's not perfect, but if you've got something to say, it will help me to refine and develop and advance it. And that puts you in a relationship of knowledge production, not just a simple position of expert telling people how it should be. Sometimes a research method can be like a laboratory experiment. So the method precedes the research. You know exactly what you're going to do. There's a standard set method for testing a substance in a jar in the laboratory. There's a way of doing it which has been invented and devised before, and your job is to follow the rules and do it according to the instruction manual. We have government organisations who are tasked with allocating funds and with demonstrating value for money. And what they've done is impose, or attempt to impose, some aspects of scientific research onto the research done in art, design and the humanities. It doesn't really fit. I think if they'd come and asked the artists and designers, how do you work and how do you measure the quality of your work and how do you justify what you've done, we could have told them. It didn't quite work like that. There was more a case where they said the taxpayer wants to know that they're getting value for money and we want to see that what you're doing meets high standards of research. So to some extent we have to wear the wrong trousers and behave according to the rule book that we weren't closely involved in writing. Some artists and designers have opposed it, and they've said that although scientific research is, of course, brilliant at solving problems, its moments of greatest breakthrough can involve redefining the problem itself. And actually, that's what art and design does best. When you're set a design brief or you're given a commission, you look at it and say, well, what do they want? They say they want a mural, or they say they want a video, or they say they want a textile hanging or an illustration, but is that really what they want? Your job is to say, is this brief right? Or could I say, what about if I interpret it in this way? And that makes me reframe the question. So when somebody comes to you with money and they want you to do something, if you're desperate for money, as I often have been, you think, I'll do it. And don't ask too many questions because you need the cash. But actually, as a public intellectual, your job is to help reframe the brief. And you can say to them, thank you for asking me. I really like the idea of doing this commission. It's got some fascinating issues about it. But let's think broadly about what it is you actually want to achieve. Could we reframe the brief to think of it in this way rather than that? And quite often you'll find that the client will say, well, actually, yeah, that's an interesting way of going about it. We'll come some way towards that. And you can help reframe the question so that you don't simply do what you're told for money. This digital image from an electron microscope shows a neutrophil of the human immune system. That's the yellow part, the blobby thing, and it's engulfing anthrax bacteria. Before advances in technology made this kind of image possible, the problem of controlling infection was defined in terms of killing bacteria, often with antibiotics, and by sterilising the environment, usually with chemicals. So in the modernist period of disease control, of epidemiology, it was all about disinfectant, scrubbing down, making sure everything was clean, and then using antibiotics to target the bacteria. Worked fantastically well up to a point. But as we know, there's a world crisis of antibiotics now, because immunity is a dynamic feedback loop. And if you take antibiotics and don't finish them off, for example, your system can rebel, and the disease can become multi-resistant. But the image has helped us understand the problem differently. Here's an example of how visual culture, the electron microscope, helps us see what's happening. And when you see it, you go, do you know what? There's an immune system functioning to work at like a living fight against infection. If we build our immune systems, that's a completely different way of approaching disease to wiping out bacteria. And so we still have the problem, but because we see the problem differently, we change the question, and when we change the question, a different answer comes up. So this is an example of how visual culture, images, can help reshape research questions to get different kinds of result. Research can be understood as the acquisition and sharing of knowledge, and as I would say, these are vital aspects of an open democratic society. The freedom of information, like the internet and the printing press before it, changes the world. It means that we're no longer subject to superstition. It means we no longer simply have to do what the monastery tells us, that we can start to exchange and test ideas and make our own mistakes. Doesn't solve the problems of the world, but it brings them out into the open. From information technology to human health to climate change, the problems and opportunities we face together as a society are much too big, I think, to be faced by private individuals. And that's why the way that we represent problems and communicate them is a public matter. So you're often told that your investment in your education is a private investment so that you can get a better salary in the future. It is that, but it's more than that. It's also that you're taking your place in the world as a public intellectual. You're part of the society, you're helping to make the society more conscious of itself, more aware of itself, and more open to new ways of doing things. Because it's only by that that we can combat such things as superstition or fake news, that we can engage openly with the world as a group, as a discourse, as a society. This image comes from the student occupation of the Jeremy Bentham rooms at University College London in 2010. And I took this photo because I was fascinated by this table. It was a gathering of people that had come together to say, this is our university. We're the students and staff. We are this university. Without us, this place is nothing. And they occupied it, and through weeks they had discussions and debates about what is the point of knowledge? Why do we learn things? What do we inherit from the past, and what do we want to hand on to the future? How is it we can work together even though we don't really know each other? What do we share in common, and where do our paths go in separate directions? And the idea of a corkscrew, an electric iron, a jug, a plate of food, a text there on feminism, a can of Pepsi, plastic bag and piles of PhD theses. This was the kind of thing that happens when people get together to make new knowledge. It makes a mess. It isn't neat and tidy. It isn't something you can predict in advance and know properly, but it will change the world in some way, because I know that the people who were in that room shaped and changed their ideas in a kind of crucible of exchange. Now to briefly tell you a little bit about myself as an artist. I studied years ago, 1986, I came to St Martin's School of Art, and I met this guy, Matthew Cornford, and he and I worked together for 28 years. The kind of research that we did was site-specific projects or engagements with particular contexts in public places. This is like a conceptual map of how that research was framed. And I go back to the authors here, Coughlin and Brannick, 2001. So this is referencing their concept, their diagram, but I redrew it to make it simpler. I think for me it was too complicated, their version. But you have time along the horizontal axis where it belongs, and change on the vertical axis. And this idea, the basic schema of a spiral that loops and moves forward, is how action research progresses. It's not a straight line, that's the first thing, and it doesn't take you straight from one point to another. It's a looping process. The reality is, for me, that it's multiple spirals all spinning out of control all the time. So my mind goes off, I wander and digress, I lose myself, I come back to the point and think, actually, since I read that thing there, it's made me think differently. And I edit and change texts. I think thoughts in mid-flight sometimes and alter my course of direction. It's not nearly as neat and rational as that makes it appear. So when you see a diagram like this, don't be intimidated and think, oh God, I wish my mind worked so smooth and steady. My advice would be that it shouldn't. This is just a conceptual schema. But it has two key elements, and this is action and reflection. Earlier when I spoke about critical theory, where you take a position in a situation, you don't just look at something through binoculars from a moving vehicle. You go up and you talk to people, you get involved, you see things from a different point of view, and maybe your point of view will be changed. But the idea that you work with people in situations is crucial to action research, and as an artist with Matthew Cornford, that's what we did. Paulo Freire was a radical educationalist in Brazil in the 1970s, and his idea of pedagogy of the oppressed gave rise to this theory of action research. That actually the things we think we know are mostly things we've been taught out of what we've been shown. We've been able to range a bit further than that, but it's amazing the extent to which your set of views on the world will have been produced from childhood until now. And that only when you really start to take it apart and question it, you realise which parts of it you want to hang on to and which parts maybe need revising. So each project we would do would take us to a new place, and they always call for interacting with a curator or an institution. You can't just go and do stuff without any permission at all until we have a state of anarchy in the world, and then you don't need anyone's permission. The world is more structured than anarchic, and so if you want to go and do a show in a gallery, you have to approach a curator or a museum director, or hopefully they'll approach you. This is the interior of the particular space I want to tell you about today. It's quite similar to this lecture theatre in a way. There's no space to hang anything on the walls. There is in there. What they did was took away the windows and took away, therefore, the light and the ventilation and put it all into this panel overhead, a big panel of services. And you can see up there extractor fans and then track lighting, emergency lighting, and I think sprinklers in cases of fire. So water, light and air are all gathered together and turned into a sort of machine panel at the top. And we found that quite interesting because this gallery is in the Midlands of Britain, where the Industrial Revolution began, where the big split of culture splitting away from nature really started to take over. The Industrial Revolution was an amazing place where fossil fuels were first harnessed to make real motive power that transformed our ability to make objects and to transform materials and actually transform society. We turned from a rural society of farmers into an industrial society of people in factories, and it amassed enormous amounts of financial capital as well as physical power. And this wonderful painting by P.J. de Lutterberg shows that. It's an oil painting, so it comes from the time before modernity in a way, before photography and film. It was hand painted, oil on canvas, but what it shows is this mystical reverence in the shape of the moon there on the far right, being eclipsed by the power of technology driven by fossil fuels. It's like this stuff is going to change the world, and you could see that he recognised that. But it's a dark vision, hellish in a way, with smoke and sulphur, and the idea that the night sky is lit up by flames. It looks a bit like a volcano or something almost, the power of the blast furnace. So I think it was a moment when one period in culture of the oil painting of the landscape saw something coming. And he just said, look at this, this is really big change. It's terrifying but exciting at the same time. I took this as a photograph from a moving train from a distance with the kind of lens that allows you to capture things at speed. And it's basically a coal-fired power station generating electricity to power the train that I was on. And I was interested in the idea that the same system which I'm opposed to, fossil fuel burning generation of electricity, was carrying me where I needed to go. So I wasn't looking at it from a distance in terms of a separation. I've actually joined to it. The electrical wires from my train were going to that power station. I was benefiting from the thing that I wanted to stop. So the conflict is implicit in the image. If I didn't tell you that, you'd just think it was a picture of some chimneys. But if you know that it's taken as a conscious image of internal conflict, on the one hand I want to stop fossil fuels, on the other hand I'm using them, it kind of connected me to the subject that I was researching. Here's another example of how critical thinking can help. It's a diagram of the electricity that comes from a power station, and it goes down the wires to get to the light bulb at the far end on the right. And the red arrows draining away are the waste. I couldn't believe it. When I first saw it, for every 320 units or therms of energy, 65% of it is wasted. 65%. Imagine for every pound you earn, 65 pence, you just throw it away. That wouldn't be acceptable. You go along and you buy a bottle of water and they just pour away 65% of it before they give it to you. You'd go, I'm not doing that. That's not on. But with coal, we let it happen all the time. That's what's powering our lights here. 65% of the energy of the coal is gone before it gets anywhere near the wires, much less to the actual light bulb. But then a question came to mind. It's like, we've been told to be energy efficient. We've been told to turn our heating down, to change our light bulbs. Do the green thing, buy yourself a compact fluorescent light bulb and do your bit for the environment. I did that for years, thinking, okay, I'm doing my bit, maybe everybody else will do their bit too. But the truth is, that's like taking the frame and saying, let's just look at this very small thing here. Let's not look at the big picture. But as an artist or a designer, thinking critically, you can go, hang on a minute, is this the right picture? Or does it carry the right assumptions for us to base our action on? And here, this blew me away when I saw it. I thought, well, it doesn't really matter if you leave the lights on or not. We've got to shut the power station down. It's a different kind of problem. And so you start with one thing where you're doing as you're told, doing your best, being nice, being positive, and then you see that the question has been presented to you wrongly or in a way which carries a bias, and that you have the power to redetermine the question. Then you face the issue of like, oh, what you mean I've got to go and lock myself to a coal train with an anchor around my neck and be arrested by the police? I've never done that. I've done demonstrations and things many times, but I've never done direct action of that sort. So you then face a question of like, am I really committed or shall I find another way around? Anyway, as an artist, this was the year 2007, so it's 10 years ago now, I can't believe it. But we said, let's do something in the gallery that connects the clean white space of the gallery to the dirty world outside. The white cube of purity that we were shown is actually connected by wires to the power station, and the power station is connected by trucks to the coal mine. They burn coal to make electricity. It seems unbelievable. You always see the pictures of wind turbines, but no, an enormous percentage of our electricity comes from coal-fired power stations. It's medieval. But what we did was said, okay, let's make a shape out of it. We will go along to the gallery and ask a structural engineer to test the floor. And we said to him, what is the maximum weight you can put on this floor? And he was like, well, I'm not sure. Down in the cellar, he checked it. They did a test drilling. They measured the tension on the beams supporting the floor underneath. And he said, okay, the maximum you can put on this floor is 14 tons. And we said, great, that's what we'll do. We're going to get 14 tons of coal and heap it up in the gallery. So that's what we did. We took the maximum load-bearing weight of the floor from an engineer who said any more than that is dangerous, that's the limit, and we put it on the floor in a way that we had the minimum passageway around the edge, which the law says is 1,500 millimetres. It's so that you can get a wheelchair for a person that needs assisted access. 1,500 millimetres around the edge, 14 tonnes was the weight. So we didn't have to design it, it just designed itself in a way once you frame the question in a certain way. Next thing we did was he said, okay, this is about electric light in the gallery, the idea of the white cube. Why don't we switch the lights off? So we just did that. We threw the light switch and threw the whole gallery into darkness and shut down the air conditioning. We said, okay, for the duration of this show, we're going to shut down, power it off. There were lights and things going on outside. We couldn't stop the whole building. We couldn't stop the whole town, but symbolically we could stop the gallery. So we did a clunk and shut the power off. All the fans stopped and it went quiet. And the smell of the coal came up, a sort of gassy, greasy, oily smell. And in the darkness, people were safe. They could walk around and there was an assistant there with a flashlight to show them. But you relied on your other senses than just your sight. And the idea was that we would stimulate reflection and hopefully discussion on the connections between climate change and fossil fuel, between coal and electricity, and between electricity and artificial light, as what I think is one of the primary elements of visual culture. We all take it for granted, electric light, but we're all told that we have to burn fossil fuels to keep the lights on. It's one of the prime reasons given. Without fossil fuels, you'll be in the dark. And so we said, well, let's try it then. How bad is it to be in the dark? Can we be enlightened in our thinking? So we made the physical form of 14 tons and 1,500 millimetres out of the law. So we wanted to give physical form and visual expression to the law relating to the limit. But what we were actually doing was thinking about the limit of the planet, the limit of the atmosphere to absorb the byproducts of our industrial life. And the limit is very real. When I've been campaigning on this for like 25 years, it's going to be your problem, folks. I'll be dead and gone long before it really hits. It's beginning to hit now, but it's going to send shockwaves through the economy. It's going to change the way our society is ordered. It'll change the coastline, but way before the moment when we get flooding in our cities, there'll be disruptions to food supplies, there'll be problems with a financial shock, all sorts of things will happen, and you're going to have to deal with it. And it will change the length of time that you're able to live healthy and fulfilling lives. And it doesn't look good. But most people don't want to talk about it because it looks so bad, so everyone just goes, let's not talk about that. It's like religion or politics, don't mention climate change. But I think it's the job of art and design to have a go and say, well, look, do we accept that it's okay not to talk about it, or would it be better to try and find some way around it? We gave the title from a book by George Orwell, who's a wonderful writer, the simplest, clearest English language. And he writes, he's like he's speaking straight to you. It's amazing. The lion and the unicorn comes from the badge of the royal crest. And the idea is of a power structure of the British Crown, like Crown copyright, or the fact that the Queen has £10 million invested in a paradise tax haven. So this idea of royalty is something where you just go, Your Majesty, you know, everything you do is wonderful, I salute the crown. I would have the monarchy wiped out tomorrow if I could. I think that it's a false form of power. It isn't based on skill. It's based on the ability to cut people's heads off and put them in the Tower of London. It's a terrible, racist, imperialist, colonialist, extractivist monster, the royal family, and it doesn't do as much for tourism as we're told. That's just my view, though. You might have completely different views. But the point is that you can attack the symbol of the thing you don't like sometimes and use it to say, well, what is it about lions and unicorns? The lion of Africa, maybe, so Britain's powerful because we can capture lions and put them in the zoo. The unicorn is a fantasy of another magical time when all sorts of spirits and demons are much better than real knowledge. So we could do away with both the symbol of ignorance and superstition and the symbol of power over other parts of the world, and also question what the British Army's for. So I've got all kinds of views that go off the deep end, as you can imagine, but back within the realm of artistic practice, you can link out to literature and borrow something from somewhere else to say, I like George Orwell, I'm going to title this particular installation after the book that he wrote. At the time of researching, I don't know why, I can't work it out, but I missed this. I read it, but I didn't really act on it. It's 2007. George Monbiot wrote Leave It in the Ground, and he's talking about fossil fuels. Don't bother turning your light bulb down. Don't bother, in a way, not don't bother, but it's insufficient to change your light bulbs and reduce the temperature of your home and buy energy efficient appliances. Necessary, but it's nowhere near sufficient. All that does is delay the problem a bit longer. The problem is that carbon dioxide accumulates in the atmosphere. It does not blow away. It does not get absorbed by the sea. The forests are not absorbing carbon dioxide. These were hopes that we had over the last 20 years, like, please God, let it be absorbed by the world's forests. Dear Santa, would you allow the carbon dioxide to sink into the oceans and just wash away somewhere? It's not happening. It's really known now that it accumulates. And there's a threshold when it gets too much, just like the breaking point on the floor. If you go over 14 tons, the floor breaks. And it's different after it's broken from just before it's broken. We're living in the moment just before it's broken. George Monbiot, 10 years ago, clocked it and he said, leave it in the ground. And he was ahead of anybody. I've never found anybody that said that earlier than him. So he came out with something in the newspaper. It wasn't published as a research paper, but he worked it out. As a researcher, I failed. I got it and knew that he was right, but I didn't cite him at the time. And I should have said at the time, George Monbiot rocks. He's done something here which I support. It was only years later that I finally went, oh God, here's that article. 2007, I did read it at that time. I did know I should have said something and I didn't do so. So it's possible you make mistakes in your research with the best of intentions, but if you can give a name check to the people who you're inspired by, it's a really good thing to do. They'll be grateful, or they'll be pleased that you did in some way. Just like if you'd done something brilliant and people say, what you've done is fantastic. You go, oh, that's great, okay, I feel better now, I've been recognised. So if you want to be recognised, recognise others, and that is a core principle of research. It's spilled over. So an art installation contained in the gallery that pointed out to the world and criticised the idea of the white cube and talked about electric light as an ideology was great in 2007, but it's not enough. We had to go further. And this lovely image here shows Bill McKibben at the front of the organisation 350.org. And he got a whole city to pledge to divest from fossil fuels back in December 2012. So 5 years ago, the fossil fuel campaign kicked off in Seattle. And it has kicked off. It's been amazing. Around the world, there's been demonstrations and protests. I've been to many of them myself about going fossil free. People and Planet is a wonderful organisation I've been part of for a long time, and they help push it forward in Britain. It's a global movement, though, and it puts forward the idea that we can collectively do something about this situation. If the politicians and the bankers are not going to, we're going to have to push them a bit, but collectively we can make something happen. I've said that a University of the Arts London, is an elevated, refined and concentrated form of social value. And that social value has been made and sustained with wealth, which has been indirectly achieved through burning fossil fuels. You can't make money if you don't burn fossil fuels, if the whole economy is rooted on fossil fuels. So the cash that's come through your student fees, the cash that's built this lecture theatre, it's grounded in fossil fuels. We might say we don't like it, but we're in the position that I was in that train, where I could look out at the thing that I disapproved of, but actually I was in it, on it, and it was in and on me. So we're implicated in a system here, and like it or not, that's the way it is. So University of the Arts London is built out of fossil fuels in a way, as all universities are. When we come here, we make a positive choice to learn together. You could learn at home, Open University, Wikipedia, you can do the stuff in your flat at night, you could learn, but you come to university because it's a special place where different things happen. That's what I hope anyway. So University of the Arts London also, though, is a creative organisation, and that connects it to the world of culture, which is a collective expression of social values over time. And I think that our access to culture as producers as well as consumers of what's in the library or what's in the special collections, this gives us a special ethical obligation to the future. If you are unemployed, single mum, going to a food bank, you don't have a special ethical obligation to the future. If you're a university graduate, even taking into account the debt you've got, that's one form of obligation, a financial obligation to the future. You've got to pay it back. Unless you can get a disguise or leave the country or escape it somehow, we can talk about that. But you do have a different kind of relationship to the future than from somebody who's living on a low-lying island, barely able to feed their children and struggling as the sea level rises. Here in London, we've got power of some kind collectively. In a university, we've got a special version of that, cultural capital. Pierre Bourdieu has written about the forms of capital. It's well worth a read. I won't go into that now, but I recommend Bourdieu on the forms of capital. I gave a talk at Wilson Road in 2013, and this young lady, Georgia Brown, came forward and said, I want to do something, let's do something. We had a talk, we had a cup of tea, she knew some people, I knew some people, we got a group together of staff and students, and we said, let's launch a petition, let's have a campaign to get our university, UAL, to go fossil free. And so this was her at the Freshers' Fair. The material on the table comes off my bookshelf. There are different books and things that I've read and research papers, which is a pile that just keeps growing. But I put that stuff on the table and left it to her to do the talking, so that at the Freshers' Fair she was saying, join our society and sign up. We got about 500 signatures. They carried out performances. There was a group of about 10 of us at the peak. Not many, 10 people. But what happened was, after a year of campaigning, this came out in The Guardian. 10 UK universities divest from fossil fuels. University of the Arts was one of them. We were like, whoa, this is amazing. 10 of us, well actually about 5, who are permanently there at the core, had managed to persuade our university to do something different, which they hadn't set the agenda for. We were assessing them instead of them assessing us. So we turned the tables and said, we'd like you to do this. And they weren't happy about it, but they did do it, and they put this notice out and said, we are divesting, and we're signing up to the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. We thought this was great because it shows that you can use research to connect staff and students together to make something happen. So if we could do that, what could you do? You might think of something that you want to change and you could bring it about as part of your time here at UAL. And I'll be very willing to support you with that if you're interested. We could talk about how to go about it. Nearly done here. We just had a celebration, the Global Fossil Free Day, the Global Climate March in November 2015. I painted the banner. They went out, showed it, did lots of shouting, because we're just so pleased that you can actually make something happen. Often I go to protests and nothing happens. You get a sore throat from shouting. You feel good because you see 10,000 people you've never met before, but they all agree on one thing, and that's very rare. Usually you put 10 people in a room and you've got 10 different points of view. But somehow a big demonstration gives you a sense of like, I'm not on my own. Actually, there's other people that do believe similar things and we can agree on this much. So it's a wonderful thing. For me, part of student life and as a public intellectual, as an academic, going out on the street and shouting at police officers is a wonderful thing to do. You come away feeling like, I feel so much better for that. It doesn't change, the police won't change their mind, the government maybe won't change the law, but you recognise something different about yourself. So anybody that says there's no point, it's a waste of time, hasn't done it. If you've come back from a march or a demo and you know that feeling, you're like alive with it, it's wonderful. You recognise, and sometimes you meet people and connect up with them, or you write down a web link, you pick up a leaflet, stuff happens as a result, which isn't about changing the exterior world, but it's about changing your position within it. So the last image I want to show you today, hopefully I won't run over too much. Having had success with persuading the university to divest from fossil fuels, some of their money, 3.9 million they're divesting. It's like, okay, 3.9 million, that's pretty good. What about the 262 million that goes through the Royal Bank of Scotland? They've gone, leave it with us. We're saying, not sure, but we'll pause for the moment. It's quite tiring being on a campaign in addition to your day job, trying to put this extra effort in. So to back off and freshen up a bit, I've decided to start a new project which isn't about protest and it isn't about campaigning. It's about prefiguration, making an example of the world that I would like to see rather than complaining about the world that I'm sick to death of. So this combines as a kind of three-part conceptual model. Because I'm an artist, because I work with visual culture, I've done it as a Venn diagram. But I took pleasure out of changing the Venn diagram and turning it into an image of additive colour. So you know red, green and blue on the monitor screen. And if you combine red, green and blue light, you get white light. With paint, you combine C, M, Y and K, or you get the K as a result of mixing cyan, magenta and yellow in printing. But here with light, it comes out as white. Not that there's any value judgment attached to that, but the point about enlightenment or light as a beam, as the source of our visual culture, is that I think more visual signals probably get sent out now on screens than they do on printed pages. That's my guess anyway. That also the interest of this project is concerned with electricity. So the idea of electrical illumination and digital imaging is written into the idea of a Venn diagram that uses additive colour. Nobody really needs to know that. It's just how I keep interested in the subject. So I'm up late at night like going, what's the best way of condensing my research interests and showing that it's not one question, it's the intersection of three areas of interest. So I use the additive colour anyway. That's just an aside on how I work. You'll see what they are: renewable energy, information technology and cooperative enterprise. Now the idea here is that the renewable energy is about escaping the carbon bubble, getting away from fossil fuels and seeing like how much electricity could we generate if we bought some solar panels. Maybe we could get the university to buy some, I'm not sure, they're a bit cagey, but maybe we could buy some ourselves and test it out. Like how many solar panels does it take to run a laptop? I actually don't know. We could work it out, but I've never got round to it. But if as a group we got together and we got a solar panel and then we checked it, like how much electricity does it give? Would it run one laptop or 10? I don't know. So what if there was ever a power cut? If you could still run your laptop, that would keep you going in a way that might help you send a message to your mum to go, it's okay, we're cool, everything's all right. Or I can Google, and get my pickup from Rupert Murdoch and find out what the given reason is for the power cut. You're still rocking in a way. If you've got electricity coming through, you're still happening. You're not totally disempowered. Information technology, I'm worried about. I don't really know my stuff here, but I'm very interested in blockchain and cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology, that field that people are pushing forward to go, we're sick of the banks, we don't like the quantitative easing, we don't like the fact that our hospitals and schools are having their funding cut, we're not keen on, why should we pay tax if they're not paying tax? So for a range of different reasons, people are saying we want a new financial system that isn't going to be run by the existing establishment. Some of those people are criminals. Some of them are human traffickers. They're gun running. They're doing all sorts of weird and nasty stuff that we want to stop but can't. But on the other hand, the instrument of blockchain technology is a pretty amazing thing. It's a way of checking that a transaction has happened without using banknotes. You don't need the Bank of England if you've got blockchain. It bypasses the centralized power structures, and it can show a kind of trust, or it can substitute for a kind of trust between two people, maybe that don't know each other. So it works like a currency in a way, in that if you see a banknote, it doesn't matter if you know the person, they're going to give you the banknote, you give them the thing, and it's like, well, okay, I trust it, it's not counterfeit, it looks real. But with blockchain, you don't need a printed banknote, and you don't need a bank at all. You work around that system, and so it's a new way of capturing and transacting that isn't centralized by someone who's got power over you. And the last thing here, put it in red, is cooperative enterprise. It's not a private business I'm interested in. I don't want to make a profit. I'm not interested in profit. Common ownership and control of the means of production is a radical thing to do, and it does exist in education. There's a very good unit up in Lincoln University where they run a whole social science research unit as a cooperative. So I don't know what they do with their fees. I want to get them to come and give a talk at UAL and say, how do you do it then? Who pays, who gets paid, how does the money work if you really genuinely own and control it yourselves? So there's brilliant work being done on that. There are cooperative universities in Mondragon in northern Spain. The cooperative owns ships. It owns a right over an area of a port. They've got factories, they've got farms, they've got media companies, and they've got a university. They don't have an art school though. So I'm thinking maybe we could do something cooperative in the art school to test it out like a working model project. This is what I'm thinking. I'm reaching out to people and saying, if you want to get involved, if you're interested, or if you've got any skills that you can bring onto this. I've got some ideas. I don't really have the skills, but I've got some contacts. We might be able to get funding together. So that's my next thing, is to go away from fossil fuel divestment, even though there's more to be done, and to try this new thing where action research takes me into an area that I'm not really sure about. I don't know how it's going to work. But the idea is that through this iterative cycle of action and reflection, I learn something new so that I don't get stuck in a fixed position, but keep moving onwards and hopefully accumulating more knowledge and some kind of agency in the world, which I think would otherwise prefer I kept quiet. I've said enough, but thank you very much for hearing me out on that, and maybe we can have some kind of a discussion if you've got time. You can edit the worst bits out, can't you, Jonathan?
Easily. As in there's no edits. Any questions?
It's very weird, the lecture theatre arrangement, so maybe if you do have any questions, looking for a cup of tea. Yeah?
So going back to your site, call installation, I think it's great it's fantastic to speak about these issues because they're very interesting. I wonder, as a conceptual artist, how much importance do you give to the visual aspect of your practice? Do you see something like kind of neglection of the visual side of it as something like a price to pay in order to speak up about certain issues, or rather as something that gives you more freedom in art?
Yeah, the gallery system is a problem. It's a power structure, and it says you can do anything you want as long as it isn't going to change the world. It's like, well, I want to change the world, so it isn't anything I want. And they'll let you go, you can say and do amazing things in the gallery space that you wouldn't get away with in a newspaper or in a community centre or whatever, where there's different sets of rules. The gallery almost says, come on, hit me. Do something controversial that will attract attention. Do something new and different. Take a risk. And then you find out, like, how far are they willing to go? And that limit, that edge, fascinates me. Like, how far actually can you go? And there are theorists who say you're never going to get a revolution in an art gallery, because an art gallery represents capitalism. You've got wealthy bankers who buy art. You've got the Frieze Art Fair is funded by Deutsche Bank. And Deutsche Bank are involved in money laundering and tax evasion. They funded Auschwitz. The system of power behind the cultural system is frightening. When you look at it, you just go, oh my God, I didn't realise that Bloomberg did this or that Deutsche Bank do that. When you start to investigate who's paying for all this stuff, quite often you find out things which show that there's limits on your ability to change things.
But do you think is that what a reason why an artist can't actually change the world is because of the institutions?
I didn't quite hear, sorry.
Artists are able to change the world. Because I can't see many examples in the past.
No, you're right. And also, how much can you change it? When someone does a PhD, for example, you set out thinking, right, I'm going to do an amazing new original contribution to knowledge. 4 years later or 5 years later, you've done a great fat thesis and you're exhausted. You go, God, that was really hard. What actually have I achieved? There'll be a little small contribution to knowledge which says nobody's done this before. These people have done one thing, these people have done another, but I've just pushed it forward a tiny bit. But if it takes that long to do it, that's how long it takes. So I don't think you can expect a single art project to transform people's understanding. But a bit like the demonstration, you're not going to get the government to change what it's doing by shouting and waving a placard or, coming up with slogans. But you learn something yourself that gives you a different view of what's possible. So the change is as much within your sense of agency as it is measurable in the world outside. So it's a bit like yoga or something in that respect. The world isn't transformed if you do yoga, but maybe if everybody did, we wouldn't have so many fights at the petrol station. It's like this relationship between the individual and the society is what Gregory Bateson would call a positive feedback loop. It's not control, but nor is it complete subjugation. It's like an exchange that happens between the two. So in a way, if you don't ask too much of art, then you won't be too disappointed. But I do get frustrated with it sometimes. You see these very wealthy and privileged people collecting things to go on the wall of a high net worth individual, and you think, is that it? Is that where creativity goes? Can't we do something a bit more edgy? But you can. And I think the art school is a place where you can go much further than it would ever be suggested in the prospectus.
This is an issue of preaching to the converted.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the V&A this morning for the Woman's Hour Craftsperson of the Year Award, and very interesting conversations from the Crafts Council, from Tristan Hunt of the V&A, and the lady's name I can't remember. We were talking about education and the importance and how it's not in primary school anymore, it's not in secondary school anymore, and all of that. But in a sense, we were a very privileged audience.
Yeah.
Everyone in that room was pretty much, you might call it white middle class, middle class, financial or educational. So this issue of preaching to convert is the same with the gallery. And I suppose, I don't even know what my question is, but I'm also interested in that idea that are the art school converted?
Mm-hmm.
Is UAL converted?
Is UAL converted to what? I don't know. I mean, my experience has shown that it's divided, and that we have the academic practices on the one hand, and then you've got the administrative, managerial and executive practices on the other. And we practice critical thinking, where we say, are we asking the right questions? Are we doing the right thing? Am I showing you due respect? Is there a different way or a better way we could do this which would be more fair? It's not my perception that the executive does that. I think they're focused on the balance sheet, and they're saying, okay, we have a £200 million loan to service. We need to start a new course and charge the students as much money as we can, and cut back a bit here, but keep them happy in that way. They're looking at it as a flow of input to output in balance sheet terms. That's their job. But I think we could say, well, look, is that the best question to ask? Paying the bills is necessary, but what's it about? That's the kind of question we trouble ourselves with here. So preaching, I was brought up in a Christian school, and they used to preach to me there, and I'm like, yeah, you said this, but what about that? And the vicar would say, well, it's a mystery. And I'd say, well, it is a mystery, and maybe we should have faith, but what about, you've told us we should also think things through. And so critical questioning is a kind of tendency I have, and I think it's the opposite of preaching. It's where you lay yourself open to criticism as well as offering critical observations. But there is a problem at UAL. There's a campaign called UAL So White. It's not run by the staff, it's run by the Students' Union, and they're talking about the inherent bias. Now look at me, white, English, middle-class male, brought up in a boys' grammar school. I haven't got a leg to stand on. And yet, I passionately believe that we need a more equal society. And I don't think it's happening enough. I think the university is very focused on money, and I don't think it can do the widening participation thing it promises. But if we let them off and let them get away with it and go, oh well, it's not your fault, that would be a terrible shame. It would get worse and worse. So I think we have to sort of hold the door open and keep asking questions. Have we got the right people in the room? Are there enough of us here? Is there another way we could be doing this? Before we just answer the question set. And you answer the question set then in a more informed way. So I hope we're not preaching to the converted, but I do think that we are a narrow slice of society. I think it's a major problem, because if you haven't got the right people in the discussion, they're going to miss out on that knowledge that could give us the more useful answer for the common good. Did anybody manage to get some sleep? I gave a talk one time up in Nottingham years ago, and the student came along with one of those big puffy jackets that people used to wear then, and took it off and fluffed it up to a pillow and got her head down like this. I thought I'd rather be there sleeping than up the front talking, but anyway. Your first year, is that right?
Yeah.
First year MA, Visual Arts. So you've got it all before you. You've got to come up with a research proposal that shapes your Masters, okay?
So you still work with another person?
No, we don't work together anymore. He got fed up with me. We fell out over money. He thought I wasn't paying enough money. And I was like, what are you talking about? And we had this argument over receipts. And I was like, we've been working together for so many years. Money's terrible stuff. It produces weird misunderstandings, changes a relationship.
What are the benefits of working with someone else?
I don't know really. It's quite recent. It's a year or so ago that we stopped working together. I'm very much involved in things here at the university. I'm being moved back to Camberwell. Yes, I'm so pleased. I really want to be here, because I was based at Chelsea for a long time. But for me, making art is a necessary thing for my own sort of sanity in a way. But I've had a really long and successful career. I've had public money, I've had shows and stuff. It's lovely, but I feel I ought to step back a bit and help other people forward now. I've had my turn in a way. So I'm not pushing for new art projects. The kind of thing I'm talking about is a collaboration in a way where other people who come on board can benefit from exchanging. I don't simply say, here's what I think should be done. It's more like, let's do something that would make a difference, that would help everybody. So I'm a communist, essentially, and I want to share out the benefit and the value and find a way that we can have mutual advantage.
Do you think, do you think there is any chance of UAL becoming run on a cooperative basis, where everybody has the same wage, whatever job they do?
I've been proposing it for 5 years now, and the silence is deafening. So I've proposed it to the Vice-Chancellor, and he just sort of looked away. He's like, his face didn't move. I think an eye muscle twitched a bit as he moved away. I proposed it to the room full of professors and readers. I proposed it and linked again and again saying, what if this university were a cooperative? What would it look like? How much fees would you have to pay? Maybe you could pay less. Would we have a big new building at Stratford? Do we need that kind of debt? Or would we have said, why don't we provide artist studios? So I don't know. My dream is that we could make a picture of the University of the Arts London, our university, and draw it as a cooperative. It would be a different shape. You might have less money here and more money there. You might have a bigger space here and a smaller space there. What here and there are would be for the cooperative members to decide. But I believe it's possible. I dream of it. I think it would be a wonderful thing, because we would never go bust then. We wouldn't be in debt in a way which would put us at risk. And you would have a moderating influence of the lowest paid people like the cleaners and the highest paid person like the Vice-Chancellor. You could say, we're not doing it, and we want to change. We really want to put some money behind grants for students, so that we genuinely have a wide open student group. So I've got all sorts of ideas about that. If you want to talk about a cooperative university, I'm really happy to do that. Oh, really? Well, you've got experience of it then. For me, it's a dream, and I've read about it, and I keep thinking, God, that would be amazing. I think it would be really difficult, but it would be great.
Well, in 3 weeks' time, you're going to be back again.
I am.
Specifically with Fine Art Digital students. And you're going to be spending the day with us
Are any of you fine art digital?
Yeah, there's several other people asking you questions.
Okay.
But if others want to come and join us, you can do on that day. So we're going to, in the morning, we're going to explore some of this a little bit further, and then we'll be doing it with the online group as well.
Okay, brilliant.
I'm not quite sure what we're going to do, but we're probably going to start from this point and then kind of push some ideas, particularly looking at the art world and maybe questioning that and reimagining that. But I think the art school is a key part of that. So that's, David and I have still yet to talk about that day and how we're going to do it. We just put it in the diary and
we're open to
suggestions. Play with it.
Yeah. That's the idea. It's not about the University of the Arts has one of its strategic objectives of delivering transformative education. What, like Amazon Prime or something? Ding dong, here comes the transformative education. You go, oh, lovely, and you try it on and it fits. It's not like that. It's not a product. It's a process. You can't deliver it. You have to undergo it. And so it means that you have to start saying, what kind of questions do I want to ask? What kind of future job do I want? What kind of risks am I willing to take? Rather than, what are the assessment criteria I must meet to get a good grade? Because actually you find those questions much easier to answer once you've made the big decision about broadly what you want to be when you finish. So you're just at the start, but if you say where you want to be at the end, it helps you make all kinds of decisions as you go through. So it's a difficult thing to do, but once you've got it, you've got something that can't ever be taken away, and you won't get knocked off course too far. You can drift and wander a bit, but you can always test it and bring it back. And is it helping you achieve what you really want for the future?
Were you happy with the outcome? Were you satisfied? Did you get any feedback or opinion on it that you thought was...
Good question. Was I happy with the outcome of that project where we put the coal in the gallery? I was shocked because a group of young people came in. They were primary school children. I think that goes up to about, I don't know what they call it now, but up to 11 years old. And they came in and they looked at it and went like, oh yeah, this is like a sculpture by Richard Long. And I was like, hang on, you're at primary school. How come you don't do art at primary school? How can you know about Richard Long? And they were like, yeah, well, it looks like it's an earth art piece to me. And I'm thinking, oh, I can't take this from children. This is outrageous. I was going to tell them all about, okay, kids, you're dealing with the future, and all about like I did with you. And they're like, don't patronise us, old man. We know what's going down. It's your generation that's to blame. And I was like, oh, God. And so they grilled me, and I thought, okay, I'll be the student. They can be the tutor. And I said, how much do you know? And they were really angry and really upset. I don't know what their teachers have been telling them, the truth, perhaps. Because when you find out the truth, you're going to be angry and upset. Even the Pentagon says so. So that flipped it. That was transformative learning, and it was them telling me what they knew rather than me telling them, and it completely reversed it. So I was very grateful to them. They were sort of sulking. I don't have kids, but they were sort of sulking, like, I don't want to do this. I'm resentful and cross. And I was trying to say, okay, I'll be the good dad then. What do you want to talk about? And they're like, don't patronise me. And so it was brilliant. Their assumptions about power and their assumptions about the future, their knowledge was in a different place from what I expected. And I came away from that going like, I don't know as much as I thought I knew. And that's a really important thing for me to recognise. That was the best bit of the whole project, really. We had some lovely things happen throughout, and the gallery was wonderful, but it was those... what are you supposed to call young people today? I was about to say kids, but they're not kids. They were like small adults, and they turned it on me. The power was amazing of their scepticism and anger, really.
So did you figure out a way to address their fears, or are you not interested in that?
No, I'm really interested in it because actually that's where the political will's going to come from to change it. There's big changes happening now, but they're nowhere near enough and nowhere near fast enough. It's too slow and too late, and we're being held down. We need something like a revolution, really, where people go, this isn't on. We're not going to wipe out millions of people in the developing world. We're not going to let you get away with it in your tax havens and blow up mountains and stuff. It's not on. And we need people to go, no, it's not on. We don't do that, and you shouldn't be allowed to either. And we're not even getting the money while we're on the subject. It's not even being shared out evenly. So why should they be allowed to do that? And if people were less polite and more angry, you'd get more truth come out. And I tell you what, anger feels a whole lot better than depression. I've been depressed at times before where you just think, oh, I'm never going to do it. You're burdened by all the knowledge. You know that feeling after an internet search about 12 hours? You come away going, I can't remember anything. I can't think of what I've been doing. I've produced nothing. I feel awful. That terrible burden that you're not good enough to keep up with the information sphere. When you feel angry, it's lovely. It sorts it and you go, I've had enough of that. And it gives you a sense of purpose and it clears the clutter and it brings things into focus. up to a point. You don't want to let it destroy you, but a bit of anger is much better than depression. It feels good anyway. It makes your blood race and it gives you some strength. So I recommend acknowledging, if you feel angry about something, feel it. Don't just blink and look away, because that's when you become a cognitive capitalist. And I wouldn't advise that. You'll end up with mental health problems.
I think that there's a problem with the idea that there's not much we can do.
Yeah.
It's about the light bulb. You're like, oh,
Won't make much difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's always something you can do.
Mhm.
Even if it's like a drop in the ocean, it's still a drop. The
Yeah.
ocean's made of drops. So, but it's true that there's always this. You're going on it a little bit, and you read you read articles about what's healthy and what's not, and it changes from day to day, and you're like, I'm gonna get cancer anyway.
That's true. It's like, just go ahead and do it anyway. My mum said that one time. I don't drive a car, but when I visit my mum, she says, okay, you can drive me into town. I'm like, oh, okay, mum, I'll do it. And we were driving along, and she said, oh, look, the petrol tank's empty. Pull in here. And I'm like, hang on, I'm 50 years old. I mean, you are my mum. I love you dearly, but you don't just tell me what to do. I'm not a child anymore. I've been to art school, right? And she was like, just pull over. And I said, I'm not pulling over here. It's an Esso petrol station. Esso are climate change deniers. They lie about it. They cover it up. And she said, just pull over. And I said, Mum, if you're willing to have a reasoned discussion, that's what we'll do. But I'm not going to simply obey your orders, because I don't do that in my life. And she said, just do as I say. And I said, not happening. And I pulled up in the lay-by and said, we're either going to have a discussion about which petrol station we're going to, or you can drive and I'll sit quietly. And she was like, all right, what do you want to say? And I said, okay, Esso are climate change deniers. And she said, well, I heard that the scientists doubt climate change anyway. And that's when I said, what's your news source? And she said, BBC. And I said, got you. The BBC will present you with this idea that there's two sides to the story and they're both equal. That's a bias, because they're not equal. And she's like, all right, where are we going to go then? I went, BP, Shell, which awful petrol company do you go to? There isn't an ethical petrol company, because fossil fuels aren't ethical. So I just drove really carefully. I left the petrol tank nearly empty, drove it home. She was furious. But you can get a lot further with the gas you've got. You don't always have to refill, was the point I wanted to make.
What happened to how did you come across all the coal? Did you get funding for it, or did you have to pay for it? And then what happened to it afterwards?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you.
Struggle selling the coal.
The gallery had a budget. I think it was £2,000 budget, which is quite a lot in 2007. There's no money left now after the banking scandal. Everyone's been slashed. It's all gone to the bankers. Just a little aside here, the money given to the bankers was 500 billion. 500 billion pounds given to the banks. That's why you're paying fees. If that hadn't been given to them, you'd be getting a grant. Your life would be different. That's enough of that. Public service announcement. Back to what happened with the coal. We gave it away. It should have been buried back in the ground. We considered digging it and burying it in the ground afterwards, but we thought it's a bit stupid. It's being dug up. Once it's on the surface, the net embodied energy is like you're better off burning it. There's still people who've got fuel poverty in Wolverhampton with open coal fires. Oh, imagine that would make your chest feel if you're breathing in coal smoke. It's disgusting. It's worse than diesel. But these people came to the gallery and said, we're at food banks. Can you give us the coal? And we were like, of course you can have the coal if you want it. And we all got together and shoveled it back into bags. And these old ladies took it away in carrier bags. And people came in transit vans and took it away and burned it. Because we couldn't put it back in the coal mine. We're not going to take it to the bloody power station. So people burned it and kept themselves warm on it. And I'd say that was maybe at least you get 75% of the heat rather than 35%. So it was like the least worst thing we could do with it. With all our installations, we've done that. We bring materials together, make a show of it of some kind, and then disperse it back into the world. We don't tend to make commodities for sale. It's more like a temporary installation that you kind of scatter afterwards. It means you don't have to pay for storage, is one thing. But also, who's going to buy a heap of coal? So we thought giving it, that's the best thing to do with it. I'm sorry I've gone on so long, but I really enjoy. It's great when you ask a question like that. It makes me realise actually that it's had some kind of an effect, even if it's only horror. That some kind of engagement is wonderful.
I kind of got the feeling. I sometimes have had the feeling. I've been kind of looking at the MA courses here for a number of years. This sense of producing a product to sell versus the idea of sort of social engagement. And I just wonder how what guidance would you give to a student wondering about whether they want to produce something that they can make a living out of, as opposed to hoping they will get funding from somewhere to sustain their artistic practice? How do you juggle that? How do you make a living as an artist that isn't about making paintings that will sell for £10,000 or sculptures that finally, it's a dilemma as an artist, isn't it?
Yes, or you could reframe the question of like, what's your relationship with money? And my relationship with money is terrible. I don't have very much of it, but I've tried to pay off my debts, because debt, I've been researching finance a lot, and when you're forced into debt, the system uses your debt to go and blow holes in mountains and drag minerals out of the earth and throw carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's what debt does. It's part of the extractive industry. Finance powers industry. And when you borrow money, they take that and say, right, we've got power over you and we're going to use that to create further production. So the less you have to do with money, the better. It would be better to be poor, in a way, in the sense of voluntary simplicity. When you see somebody in a really big, expensive car, covered in gold and jewellery and gems and so on, and silk and so on, you're pretty sure that they're taking more from the world than they're giving back to it. Because if you're going to live in balance, it means wearing old knitwear and not having high fashion. It means riding a bike and not having a big car. It means, less jet travel. It means doing with less, basically, so that your lifestyle would be more like that of somebody in what we laughingly call the developing world, the deliberately underdeveloped world. So less money is generally a good thing, as long as you're healthy and clean and well nourished. You don't really need much more than that if you've got time to do your art or your design. So my relationship with money has been, I've never made money out of art. I've made projects to commission, and you always break even, or you end up a little bit in debt. You spend a bit more than comes in from the commission. My living comes from being an academic at the university here. So they pay me to research and to supervise PhDs and take part and cause them trouble as well, which is wonderful. But I'm never going to get rich on it. And I don't have loads of possessions. I kind of lead quite a simple life. So each person will find a different way forward. You might find that you can make things as an addition, as a printmaker or whatever, and sell them, and that can sustain you in a way which is better than wage slavery, and it's better than working as an intern for nothing, for example. It might be that it isn't transforming the world, but it's not doing much harm. You're selling modest commodities and people enhance their homes with them because they like your work. I don't see the harm in that. You might get into the Frieze Art Fair and get tens of thousands of pounds for your work and be represented by the White Cube Gallery, but the chances of that, for me, I've never made it. I've come close to it a few times, but never quite got right inside. I've come near to prizes and awards and so on, just peeked and dipped away from it. So I've been close enough to see, what it looks like. And it's not that great, to be honest. You get very proud people who think they are absolutely fantastic, and they'll sort of look the other way when you come in the room because you're clearly not the next big thing. And you're like, oh, all right, fair enough. So money turns people's heads, and the more you have of it, the more proud and self-centered you become. So I don't really want that much of it, to be honest. I'm not hungry for it. But I do think it should be shared out more evenly. And this whole business about the tax at the moment, seeing these people not paying any tax at all. I'm not going to shop from Amazon. I won't go in a Starbucks. I won't do business with Waterstones. All sorts of people, when you look it up, it's like, what? They're not paying any tax. If they did, you wouldn't have to pay fees. It's as clear as that. It's not like some strange thing. So money, I would say, is you wouldn't be in debt if the world shared the money out more evenly. You wouldn't have to even sell your work. You'd give it away. We'd have a different kind of world order. So it's an odd answer, I'm afraid. It isn't like professional advice, but it's more like, don't worry about making loads of money, in a way. It's more like, do what you most want, and you won't need much money then. It's probably not a very helpful answer, is it? But that's what I tell myself in the morning. You don't need it. I think we've probably done long enough, haven't we? What I'm going to be here in the future, though. I'm going to come back and speak to others of you, and I want to see your work and see if we can find a way forward for that. We could have a laugh with it, make some interesting observations, and take it forward in a way that's going to work for you. And if you're on the MA Visual Arts, I'm available to come and talk to you about your work. So we can organise that either one-to-one or in a group, through your tutor, whatever works best. And we can come and see what you're doing and see how it might go forward. I'm looking forward to that. I think I'll enjoy it anyway. Okay, thanks very much then. Let's call
Thank
it.
you, David.